and welcome. Give it one more minute. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll have some more late joiners, but I think we should go ahead and get started. All right. So welcome everyone to the final messy conversation of this spring quarter, titled Languages of Becoming and Journeys to Identity, with our very own David Tripp and Dr. Russell E. Thornhill. I'll have to get used to saying doctor. It's nice to say. And we'll have introduction to their conversation in just a bit, but before that, a little bit of housekeeping here. So this is the final messy of spring quarter, and this summer will mark the 5th anniversary of the founding of Messy Conversation. And coinciding with that, there will be some reorganization in our planning team, and we're going to take a bit of a step back over the summer to do some thinking about Messy Conversations going forward, working on our goals to expand the audience, and sharing some of our process updates with you all throughout that process as we work towards programming fall. And in preparation for that, we do have a short Google form survey that we are asking our most dedicated Messy Conversation attendees to complete. So I will put that in the chat now. And if you all are willing to fill this out. Oh, Rose already
I
did.
put it, yeah.
That's great.
I put it, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. That would be really helpful for us going forward. And to be a little more specific, one of those reorganizational moves in this summer is that David Tripp, our fearless leader of 5 years, who founded Messy Conversations along with some other undergrad faculty, including Sarah Beth, who's on the call, and Anna, also on the call, will be stepping away from the planning team going forward. And in honor of that, we did make today 2-for-1 entry. So, if you bring a guest, they're getting in free today. We've also made sure there's plenty of parking available at this Messy, because we knew that was going to be a big deal. And we'll try to get out so you all can beat traffic on time. All things very important to David Tripp, I know. And to introduce the conversation, I mean, I could talk about David forever, but I think we all here, if you've ever attended a Messy, know that like this space wouldn't exist without David. It reflects his ethos and his approach to others, to his openness and desire and willingness to create spaces where people can have those difficult conversations and really connect on a human level. And that's one thing I'll say about David. He is a human, and I think he's been an advocate for us retaining our humanity in these times. So I will pass it off to Sarah Beth to expand and introduce our conversation.
Thank you, Asa. David, I just want to acknowledge that I think the day that I started to get to know you was the day that the vision for Messy Conversations was built. And I am wanting to think that was 22 years into your 27 here. Is that right? 22? That was 5 years ago? Is that how long you've been here?
Oh, longer.
Contributing, working with students? And this collective vision that we had in that small group, including Anna Kwong, who is here today, uh, was to find a way forward after the murder of George Floyd and to acknowledge the harm of racism in our country, in our work in higher ed, in our lives, in our relationships, and mostly to find a way forward together to think and feel and be more anti-racist. There's so many people that have been involved, including Kirsten Grimstead, Anna, as I mentioned, Lisa Lepore, and that first messy conversation that you were a panel member on was with Dr. Gills, Dr. Parker Gills, who joined our planning team, and so many others. It wasn't very long before we realized that student voice and student leadership was critical to this work that we were doing. And so wonderfully, we were joined by Clarence Williams and Jacqueline Rose. And soon after that, Asa came aboard, Rosa came aboard, Nabi came aboard, and now we have Cian here. And I hope I didn't miss anybody, but I have just so appreciated your leadership and especially your reminder of how we are so different from each other, each of us. I think you might have told us that at least 120 times. Isn't that how many times we've been meeting on these planning team meetings? So that's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of opportunity to get to know each other. And what I have really appreciated is your modeling of acceptance and great caring in this work, as well as those brilliant thinkers, including Dr. Russell, who is here today with us, and many other caring hearts who have moved into this fold with us here at Messy Conversations. So thank you for your vision and your kindness and all the support that you've given to each of us and your organization that's kept us continuing to invest in this each week. Really appreciate it. With that, I'm going to move on to just sharing a little bit about our panelists today, and I'm going to start with Dr. Russell's background. He earned a BA in liberal studies with an emphasis in nonprofit management, followed by an MA in organizational management, and attended seminary where he received an MA in religious studies. On May 2nd, he was conferred his doctorate in educational and professional practice with a concentration in social justice leadership. Dr. Thornhill's dissertation titled Loving, Learning, Leading, Living, a Scholarly Personal Narrative of a Black Gay Father. Dr. Thornhill is here today teaching in our undergraduate and graduate programs at Antioch, and also serves as co-director of the Bridge program. So thank you, Russell, for being here. Most of you have heard David all of these years, but you may not know all of these things about him, that he taught at USC, CSULA, Southwest East Community College, and Glendale Community College before teaching his first course at Antioch in the summer of '89. And he's been here ever since. He's the director of the Queer Studies Area of Concentration at AULA, served as the chair of the BA program 98 to 2002, and was the founding director of that Bridge program. Always passionate about teaching and suffering from an infinite curiosity problem. Over the years, he designed over 40 courses or workshops for undergraduate students, and we're grateful to have both of you here today to share this interesting conversation called Languages of Becoming and Journeys to Identity. Take it away.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Special thank you to both you, Asa and Sarah Beth, for your kind and generous words. I appreciate it. So I also appreciate having my colleague, Russ Thornhill, who I've known for a while now, joining us for today's messy conversation. Last one was spring quarter, and an opportunity to do something to recognize Pride Month, and to recognize Russell's recent accomplishment. My apologies for messing up the bio for you, Russell, on the flyer and not including the doctorate that you just finished. So congratulations on that.
Thank
And
you.
I wanted to start, Russ, our conversation by talking a little bit about your dissertation. Uh,
Mhm.
and a couple of things, if you don't mind. One, if you could briefly speak to the methodology, because I think a lot of people don't know that that's a kind of academic approach that you can take to academic work and to your dissertation. So I think that could be really interesting. And then
Mhm.
also just, um, what's the story? Why was that what you did? And we'll start there and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's just an honor to be here, and David, to be here with you. Given this is your last one, it's what it sounds like. So, but to share about my dissertation, it was a four year a program, and the scholarly personal narrative was uh, presented to us by Dr. Nash, and what it addresses is it's a personal journey dissertation. So it is my journey. It's a very particular part of my journey in conversation with scholars, right? That's where we bring in the documented scholarship, answering the questions, right? So answering the dissertation questions. So it's important in this piece, though, that the scholarly part is where the lit review comes in. Okay. And the reason why I wanted to take this approach is that probably 5 years ago now, and it was Father's Day 5 years ago, I was in a group meeting with some of my brothers in community, and we were talking about our father's journey. And come to find out, it was probably about a dozen of us in this meeting and one of our community groups. And come to find out that everyone that was in that a group session were all Black gay men living in the urban setting, living in South LA. And all of us had our father's experience, whether we were biological, whether we were raising our grandchildren, or whatever the situation was. And then come to find out also that those stories were not widely told outside of those settings, right? So they were not documented. And that's what got me really thinking about the importance of documenting personal stories. I don't know how many brothers through the years that I have buried as a result of AIDS, and I know we'll talk about that later, that did not get a chance to document. They may have shared it, but not document their stories. So as I entered this dissertation process, I was looking for a mechanism to help me do that. And Dr. Stephen Brookfield, who used to work with us, Dr. Nash, had this methodology that's been around for a while. It's not something that's new. It's not widely known, but it pits the writer, the student, with scholars. So I'm researching scholars from current and past times, um, but I'm answering the dissertation questions as I'm developing my whole dissertation. And so the stories that I selected were stories that started in 1990, because that's when my journey in liberation theology and social justice really began earnestly. When I entered my church, Unity Fellowship of Christ Church in Los Angeles, and then my work with Minority AIDS Project. That later I became the CEO of Minority AIDS Project. So I talked about my entrance into those organizations. Also, speaking about my fatherly journey and my coming out process in 1990. Right. So those were the key stories that I addressed. Then I addressed social justice leadership in the later chapter. But I just felt like those were important. If I'm going to do this work, then it's really important for me to dig in. And I was also I did not want to take on interviewing other people, doing another kind of methodology where I would be interviewing other people. I said it needs to start with me. Right. And then later on, I will, talk with other people. But this particular dissertation needs to start with me. And that's how I got to this place. And the title was very intentional, because one of the things that Dr. Brookfield, kept saying to us is that it's important that you put scholarly personal narrative in your title so that people who are researching it will be able to find it. But the other thing that came up is that people said to say in the title who you are and what you're doing. And that's when Black gay father came up. And I said, I own all of that. So people who are researching this, because that was an important part of my work, is that people who are researching this will see that a Black gay father wrote this piece. And that was another important part of my work, because I did not want it to just rest on bookshelves, and then collect dust someplace. I wanted it to be accessible to the community. So it shows up in various areas where I have sent it out so people will be able to see it. But I wanted it to be accessible to the preachers. I wanted it to be accessible to family members, to parents, to other students, right? Not just sitting in an archive someplace and, the only people who might access it are people from academia. I did not want that to happen. So the title was very intentional in the way I did it.
I really appreciate you unpacking that a bit, Russell, because I think, as you said, it's not a widely known format for academic work, and I think it'd be a great interest to so many of our students.
Yeah. The other thing, David, too, about this is that and during the lit review part, I found that there were not a lot of stories told about Black gay fathers. Right. So you hear stories about Black men. You hear stories about gay men. You hear stories about fatherhood. Right. That is written about in literature. Right. But to hear the story of a Black man who identifies as being gay, who lives in the urban setting, as I raised my kids while I was in South LA, that's where I lived, right? Who identifies as being gay and as a minister, as an ordained minister and a scholar, all this kind of stuff, that's just not widely written about. And that was the other piece that really drew me into this, is that I wanted to write about all of that under one cover.
And yeah, there's a great deal of intersectionality playing out there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
As we've been talking about your work in preparation in part for this Messy Conversations, one of the things that kept coming up in your language was your interest in, what does it mean to become an LGBT person or a queer person, and what are the things that shape that thwart that enable that, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak to your interest in the becoming?
I do, because some of that is taken out of my dissertation, but becoming is a journey. And that was a journey for me. And as I speak to other people, it's a journey for people. You are journeying through language. You're journeying through religion. You're journeying through family, as you're becoming whoever you want to be in the world. You're journeying through the language of queer, LGBTQI, same gender loving, queer. What does all that language mean? So as you are discovering who you are, you're on this journey to in becoming. There's a coming out process here. There's a language in the community and outside of the community, that you're journeying through. There's a phase of understanding, as I just said, the queer and LGBTQ plus language, right? There's the demeaning language that we have to deal with, right? As in becoming, you're being called a punk, you're becoming the faggot, you're called the sissy. Many of my contemporaries, as I've shared with you, really turn away from the language of queer because what it has meant to Black people, being strange, being ugly. It's not something that you embrace as being loving. And then you connect the word queer, which is what has happened to me. When you connect the word queer to nigger, then you have queer nigga, right? So now you are a Black person with these ugly phrases around you, and you are navigating through all of that in becoming who you want to be. And I had to navigate through all of that personally, and I know others who have had to do the same thing. There's discovering, in this becoming part, there's discovering the understanding the biblical interpretations. That's a whole component by itself for some people. So in this journey of becoming and identifying who you are and want to be in the world, there are layers to that. And so that's why pride becomes so important, David, is because people who are navigating through that and have navigated through it want to get to the place where they throw up their hands and they say, free at last. Right? Because you have come through something, or you're going through something, right? And so when you get to a place like where we are right now during Pride Month, which dates back to 1969 in Stonewall Inn at Christopher Street in New York, people are freeing themselves from those chains of what religion said, of what the language said, of what the punk sissy was all about. And so you're becoming this free, liberated individual to say, yet, which is why I could say Black gay father, which is some people say I am queer, which is other people will say I'm same gender loving, right? You're going through a process to get there. It's not something that you get to right away. I think as I shared with you before we came on, I just, in one of my Facebook or Instagram feeds, this Black man was coming on in 2025. Black man was coming on talking about his coming out story, and coming through his becoming process. And he said, I had to tell my mother, I had to tell my father. My mother said, now you got to go tell your father. And then the father said, now you got to tell your brother. This is in 2025. That is the same thing that happened to me in 1990, of April of 1990, going into a Good Friday and that Easter resurrection time period. I couldn't go through that baptism period without coming out to my father, my mother, my brother, and my former wife, the mother of my children. I had to go through all of that. So I hope that helps to answer where you are. What came up for me, though, in talking to you about this, is what does queer mean to you? Because that's the language that you most connect with, because you teach that, and you have shared with me what that queer language means for you, and maybe you could share about some of that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, our conversations have been about, in part, the intersection of sexuality and race,
Mhm.
and how in that plays out differently, and that in the for you in 1990, um, you, what you what you I don't know what word to use. I'm going to use gravitated towards um, what was gay, right? That made sense in all
Mhm.
kinds of ways to you. Um, for me, just as a human being, I've always resisted categories.
Mhm.
I'm not particularly interested in categories, and I know that there's a certain position of privilege that allows me to say, "Oh, I'm not all that interested in categories," but whatever they are, whether they're about your sex, your gender, your sexuality, um, anything about you, I just don't find them interesting. And so when I encountered queer, and we'll get to this later, but where I encountered queer was in my, well, in part in my doctoral program, and also at the same time in my activism around HIV and AIDS. Um, and that in that context, um, queer was a huge thing.
Mhm.
And it really drew me in as a way of
Mm.
what understanding oneself is not in terms of the possibilities that it afforded, because
Mhm.
it situates itself as in a critical way against categories, against binaries, against hierarchies, against all of these things. Well, that was right up my alley. And and you know, in the development of queer theory, one of the struggles always is, well, how are you going to define what queer is?
Mm.
And there's no consensus on that. One of the definitions that has been most interesting and helpful to me is that it's helpful to think of queer not as a noun, but as a
Mm.
verb. That
Mm.
queer isn't something that you are, it's something that you do.
Mm.
And so then with queer as a verb, now and we've seen scholarship move strongly in this direction over the last 20 years. Now, you've got all kinds of possibilities. You've got a really interesting and powerful tool that allows you to queer things.
Mhm. Mhm.
You can queer sexuality, you can queer gayness, you can queer straightness, you can queer marriage, you can queer race, you can queer post-coloniality, I mean, just so it becomes a way into
Mhm.
uh, the language I like to use is broadening the horizons of possibility
Mm.
for yourself and for others. So, that's what drew me to that language, and as a way of not saying I am queer, but
Right.
uh, I like to queer things.
Right.
It's a way that makes sense for me as a human being to make my way through the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
David, thank you for making the point about queering things. So as you were saying that, it's reminding me of a book by Dr. Brandon Crawley where he talks about queering the Black church.
Hmm.
And his book, I think his book came out last year, I think, and I actually write about this some of my dissertation. I struggled with all of that, and I first thought, do I even want to write about this? And I thought, well, Russell, you're a scholar and you're researching, you better write about this. So I did bring that in. But my journey was different because in 1990, it was important to hear somebody say it is okay for you to be Black and gay. That was important, right? Because coming out of the 70s and 80s, we heard something different, a different language. So to hear a theological perspective that said God loves you as a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender individual is okay. And that was the affirmation that was needed at that time. And it's still needed to this day, right? But that's the affirmation that was needed at that time. And that same affirmation helped our brothers and sisters who were dying from AIDS, right, to be able to have this spiritual transition, of freedom, knowing that God loves them as a gay, lesbian, transgender person.
Well, and to me, that's one of the beautiful things about all of this and these kinds of conversations, right? Because absolutely, what you're saying is just so absolutely true. Just psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, that kind of affirmation makes a huge difference for people. Um, and then it raises the question of, well, then how much room is there then for queer in that? And I think there still is, right? You've got people like Gayatri Spivak talking about strategic essentialism, and so you can take on um, categories, take on labels, take on identities, take on subjectivities, um, even if you recognize that at some level they're what I sometimes call necessary fictions. That they're not real, but they are in the world that we're living in, right?
Yes.
That you're seen that way, you're discriminated against that way, you're oppressed that way. There are communities that organize around those identities where there's joy and perseverance and love and right, all of those things. So that's
Right.
real.
Yeah,
It's
it is real. Yes.
some level, even if it isn't ultimately real.
Right. And we can acknowledge that there are people in the world today, especially the younger generation, they don't want none of them labels. In fact, that what those labels are, that's your generation. That's
Yeah.
not my generation. So I'm not going to be tied to your labels. So that's why this becoming this becoming is ever evolving for people. Right. So my generation landed someplace, your generation landed someplace. Now we have a new generation, and it's understanding their language and how they're landing, and knowing that wherever you land, it's okay. And that's the main thing there. It's that it's okay where you are, So if you don't pick up on where I'm coming from, that's all right. As long as you are landing in a place where you are feeling whole and complete as you are. You're not bringing self-harm to yourself, right? Not being unloving to yourself, right? So yeah.
So here's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time, Russell.
Oh wow.
It won't surprise you. It's just I've never gotten around to it. But one of the things you and I have in common is our work around HIV and AIDS back in
Yeah.
the day. I started in the mid late 80s. Sounds like you started in 90.
Yeah.
And I was I was a founding member of what at the time was called the All Saints AIDS Services Center because All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena, which is a church, for those of you that don't know, that has a long social justice history, like on the forefronts of a number of social justice concerns. So, not a religious person myself, but I was aware of their work, and that's where an opportunity presented itself. And so in that context, doing that AIDS and HIV and AIDS activism on a variety of fronts. Queer was really important to us. Um, and at this, not long after we started, groups like ACT UP, a couple of years later, ACT UP shows up and Queer Nation shows up. I'm in graduate school reading Foucault and History of Sexuality, Volume 1. And it turns out a bunch of the people in that organization were doing the same thing. And this presented us with models of power and activism that were so helpful to us. And so queerness as a shift away from identity towards behavior, right? So, which in part is how do we get from GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, to which is identity focused, to a different way of understanding AIDS. Because as long as it's identity focused, we're never going to get the help that we. So that's a long wind up. But the question was, so then you end up at Minority AIDS Project, Carl Bean. And the question I've always wanted is, so in that context, in South LA, in the Black community, overwhelmingly, how in the AIDS work, were there conversations about queer versus gay?
So as you raise this, I drop into the chat. I just honor in this moment my mentor, the Archbishop Carl Bean, who passed away in 2021. Just as a side note, there is a documentary that just came out. It's been released. Well, I've already seen it, but it's been introduced at Tribeca in New York. It's going to DC, San Francisco. We expect it to come here sometime in the near future. And he's the founder of Unity Fellowship of Christ Church and Minority AIDS Project. And he was my personal mentor, my spiritual guide, and I cared for him up to the time that he left here. So there were conversations about gay and queer. However, those were not, we lifted that up because people had struggled with the language, as I shared earlier. People struggled with families and community members saying you're queer in an ugly way. That was not done in a nice way. It was done in an ugly way, right? So when you look at gay liberation theology, gay liberation, bisexual, transgender liberation theology that I talk about in my dissertation, we look at it from a spiritual perspective, right? Not looking at it from a queer perspective, because that's landing for people very differently from what you said. It does not land well in the Black community. When you're already dealing with HIV, you're dealing with AIDS, your family is throwing you out. People found themselves on the streets. Transgender people find them on the street. To call somebody queer and ugly does not work, right? So that's not a language that we used. But we did affirm that if you identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, that God knows and loves all of who you are. I remember a sermon and I just wrote this down because I wanted to remember the exact language, a sermon that he gave in 1990, because in our work, the work of AIDS and the work of the church moved together in those days, right? Because it was a spiritual center for people. So the same place where we had church service, on Sunday, we would break down the chairs and it would become Minority AIDS Project. It was the same spiritual space, right? So one of the things that he taught during one sermon is he shifted the language of AIDS. And he took that acronym and taught us about what it means to abide inside dear Savior. That blew me away and many other people away to hear it in that context, right? So he would talk frequently about being a holy homosexual, right? Because he wanted people to know, as the scripture says, that you are made in the image and likeness. So if you're made in the image and likeness, that God loves you, gay man living with AIDS, God loves you, right? That was an important piece for people to understand, and he brought it together so beautifully for us. And I just continued the work that all of us were learning to do in those days, right? But this language of abide inside dear Savior, that still resonates for me to this day, because that shifts something in our consciousness that was ugly, that was not loving, that was killing our people, to let people know the Savior abides inside. Right. What that meant for people who were going home, for people who were transitioning, what that meant for them was life-changing. Because in some cases, they would be transitioning with us and not having their family members around. So we became the family members in those days. And that is what we learned from the very beginning of his work in 1982 until he left here in 21. You know, he would still be talking about Russ, take care, Russ, do this. Or he's the one that said to me about 10, 15 years ago, he said, Russ, my work in liberation was in AIDS. That's what I was called to do. And then he said to me, Russ, your work now, he was seeing this, your work is in what you do in academia. That is going to be your work in the world. Right. So he helped us to see the spiritual connection between what it means to be gay or transgender or lesbian or bisexual and your relationship with God. And people knew about the word queer, right? It's not like we didn't know that word, but to bring that into that center, to bring that into that spiritual environment would not have been a helpful thing for people. Right. I hear it differently today, but back then I would not have heard it differently. I would have been stuck with old teaching, with somebody saying that you're a queer punk faggot, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And I hear you, and it probably no doubt had special resonance in the Black community.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Because in those days I sat in these meetings. You would sit in meetings with preachers who would say you're a queer punk. I don't go along with this kind of stuff. So for me to try to address it and correct that, I'm feeding into some of their stuff, and I did not want to feed into that.
Yeah.
I wanted to reframe the language for them. Right, and not be drawn into their language. But I sat in rooms with some preachers where they got pretty ugly.
Absolutely, and I was just going to add to that that I think at the time, so queer as an activist identity, let's call it at least that, that emerges around 1990. Give or take a year. And prior to that, right, you had the folks who had participated in the gay liberation movement. And in the 70s, late 60s and 70s. And many of them had a similar response to queer. They had no interest in that. I wanted to check in real quickly with Rosa to see if we have questions from the audience. Folks who would like to join the conversation in the time that we have remaining.
Yeah, we have like about 15 minutes for comments, questions.
Are we able to pose questions generally, or do you want us to post them just in the chat?
No. Please open.
All right.
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, Russ. It was great listening to your story and learning more about you and your lived experience. And as you were talking, I was thinking about one of my favorite poets. Their name is Andrea Gibson, and they have a poem that says, I actually copied the exact verbiage that says, I said to the sun, tell me about the Big Bang. The sun said, it hurts to become. And, I'm thinking about that line in relation to you telling the stories of you know, even telling your stories of being a Black gay father and how you're talking about those stories weren't surfacing in the groups that you were in. And so I think about my lived experience in living in Appalachia and how those stories here are disappearing because of the context of the slow progression of Appalachia in, you know, LGBT rights or conversation, etc. And so I'm wondering, one, if you think that context, location influences storytelling, and two, I heard you, and these are simple, and I'll come back to that first one because I know I don't want to take up too much time. So you're talking about becoming, and you know, in the coming out process, it's never something that we become and we end. You know, it's like you don't just tell one person, "Hey, I'm a WSW," you know, I this or that. It is a process that almost feels like you never actually become because you have to say it so often. Um, and so I was just thinking about that and how that has changed from perhaps when I came out to now, is you had to like almost tell people like I'm gay, I'm a lesbian, as like a disclaimer in case they wanted to like run down the hallway. And now it seems like the becoming process is ever happening. Like we're always going to be doing it, but the vehicle in which how we speak about it is different. Now I don't have to give a forewarning, like graphic warning sign. I can simply just say, my wife and I, or yeah, I'm going to here, and kind of use it in a non warning way. And so, you know, I'm just wondering about the location context, and then also how you feel about the vehicle and route that has changed in becoming.
Yeah, I love the language that you shared about in the poem where it says becoming is hurting or something, like a language, some wording like that, right? And that is true. It is painful. It's a painful journey because first you have to deal with that internal struggle. There's an internal struggle before the words come out of my mouth. The individual and I have struggled with it, right? Do I want to? My family says I should be married with children. That's you know, you have this heterosexual model. That's what I grew up with, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? So there is a painful journey through it. But once you come, this is my experience, once you come through the journey and you understand who you are and what you're all about, the next time you have to be sharing that, you're in a different space with it. So when I had to sit with preachers, I've already come through something, right? So there's not a whole lot more you're going to say to me that I'm not going to get, and I could sit there with you and deal with the issues. You know, becoming, again, I have grandchildren. So I talk to my daughters frequently. Okay, now we're going to have the conversation. So it's going to be you having the conversation. So in one situation, this just happened a month ago. One situation, my grandson's father told them that your grandfather is gay. So my daughter brought this to me and I said, well, how are you going to deal with that? You know, I said, I don't like how he did it, but how are you going to deal with that? So this coming out it is an ongoing thing. I knew that when I placed that title in my dissertation, that's another becoming in the world. That's another coming out, and because somebody else is going to look at it and say, I didn't know that about him. Right. So we're 2025 that's going to happen. So it's an ongoing thing. But what I teach and what I talk to people about is to own your own story. Tell your own story. Don't let somebody tell your story for you. And that's the place that I got to in the 90s, is to share my own story. And I got better with it, you know, with age. You know, I'm 70 now, so I know how to do it. I know how to navigate through that. And then depending upon where you are in the world, you know, whatever your context is, hopefully people get to the place where they're so comfortable with themselves that others don't matter at that point. Either you're going to accept me or you don't. And I'm okay with that because I'm good with me. See, back in the 80s, if that happened, the 90s, if that happened, I probably would have been a different place with that. But today, I'm good. And what I say to my daughter, because she's not with the guys, the baby daddy. What I said to her, sweetheart, it's not about me. It's about how that man takes care of my grandchildren. That's what it's about. You know, so I don't need for him to like me or care about me. I'm okay with that. It's about how you take care of them. So people are not putting their issues on Russ Thornhill. No, you own your own stuff and you take care of your life and you do the things that you need to do for you, but don't put your stuff on me. I'm good with where I am. Okay.
You can elaborate a little bit more because Asa has a comment here. Asa, would you want to jump in with your comment
Yes,
question? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was, well, thank you for this openness and willingness to share with us all. So I was curious to hear a little more on how the experience of fatherhood informed that journey of becoming, or how that journey of coming out impacted your role as a father. And then you mentioned earlier, like how difficult it was to find actually literature on Black gay fatherhood, and I'm thinking too about the changes in gay marriage legalization, and that there are more same-sex couples that are parents now through adoption or some other method, and whether that there are different forms of parenthood too, like even within gay parenthood. So if you could speak to that a little, I know there's a lot there.
Yeah, you just raised the piece about the various ways of parenthood, and I addressed some of that, and there are multiple ways of parenting, which is what I found out in the group I was with a couple of years ago, and how parenthood showed up. So I was married in 1982. I was in a courtship. I did all the stuff that folks do in order to prepare for marriage. And I was in total denial about what it means, being a gay man. I didn't even say the word. I couldn't even say the words. I had a sense for behaviors, but I couldn't say the word. I was in fear. Remember, I come from a very, very traditional heterosexual family. And no matter what goes on in the family, the mother and father stay married for the sake of the family. I come from that kind of a tradition, grandparents and all of that sort of thing. So in the 80s, there was I didn't even think about, oh my God, you're going to come out. No, what I thought about in the 80s is getting married and settle down. I had a daughter coming into the marriage from her previous marriage. So I became a father to her, not thinking I'm a gay father. I am a father, right? In this heterosexual relationship. And then my biological daughter comes along in 84. And then the other kids come along right after that. It really wasn't until the 1990s that I began to step through those fears. And not just recognizing and acknowledging that I'm a gay man, also acknowledge I'm a son. My parents are still living, right? And I knew there was something inside of me that said, and you have the mother of your children. And I was walking in deep fear with that one to tell her, and I finally did that. But the one thing that we agreed to, that we talked about, was that, and you were still the father of these kids, right? That's one of the things that came out in the early 90s, because I would pick my kids up, bring them to my home. I was with my lover at the time, and that sort of thing. Today I think it's very different as I see it. How people are showing up with their families and stuff, because that comes up in my feeds a lot too. I think it's very different today. But back then, you had the pressure of the church, you had the pressure of the community, you had the pressure of the family, you had the pressure of people not knowing, you had the pressure of AIDS, and it was a lot, you know. And I needed my church community to get through it. I needed to have my social groups, my networks that I was involved with in order to get through it. I'm not sure that I could have done that by myself because I was in such deep fear about it back then. But because I linked into networks, and I believe people should be doing that today anyway, that helped me through those challenging times. Today it's different. You know, we have people who have stood up for marriage equality. We have people who marched for all of these various things. I mean, I was with a group of Black gay men who marched at the Million Man March, right, to show our presence in our community, in our families. I was a part of that group, right? So there were many of us throughout the years, these last 10, 20 years, you know, who have stood up. So people today are reaping the benefits of that. You know, there's a tide changing on how we see gay people, how we see lesbian people. And even in the face of this administration throwing transgender people out of the military, and there's fear within the transgender community, but they have a community. Right? They have a community across the country and around the world that still connect in and support each other. That was tougher, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, you know, to find that, to have that. You know, so for the people who, Marsha and the people who stood up in that first Stonewall riot in '69, you know, they were revolutionaries back then, right, doing this. And many of them lost their lives. And they didn't have organizations the way we have today, you know. So we stand on those kind of shoulders, you know, that stood up in those days so that we could be present. The young people who are coming up today, you know, they have our background who have helped to pave the way for them, you know, so that they can be in a better place today. So now you have many more progressive faith institutions that are opening for people around the world, you know, that's embracing them. You have churches, AME churches, various churches that are opening their doors in a more loving and a friendly way. So there's more institutions today than there were back 30, 40, 50 years ago. I hope that helped to answer. I know there were a number of things in there, but I tried to get as much as possible in there. The one piece that I do want to lift up, and David and I did talk about this piece early on one of the questions, and that is this notion about silence and what silence can do to you and how it could bring harm to you. You know, so a lot of the stories that I shared with you, we were silenced, we were silent, and we were silenced. We were in an environment and in an age where people did not want to hear it. They did not want to share it. And I had to sit with that, you know, inside of me. And silence can bring so much internal harm to people. Those of you who are psychology majors probably know about that silence piece. And that nurtures how I show up with my students in classrooms today. I don't shut the door to any of these kinds of conversations that come up because I want my students to feel I am in a safe space to be able to share about my journey as they write about it in leadership and multiculturalism, whatever the courses that we are talking about. I'm very intentional that people are not silenced in the classroom. I even find ways to open those doors for them to write about their journeys. And sometimes I will use my journey, you know, so my students throughout this whole dissertation process knew what I was talking about and knew what I was writing about, and they asked me questions about it. because I want them to know that it's okay in this classroom environment to be authentic about who you are in your journey. When I first came to Antioch, love y'all, but when I first came to Antioch in 2010, I didn't know that I could be safe as a gay man. I did not know that, you know. It didn't show up until much later. And then I decided when I came into this teaching environment, I said, I want to make it safe so that my students, including our bridge students, you know, if they want to share that they are transgender. I think in one of my bridge classes in Long Beach, I think I had about 3 or 4 trans men and women in that class. But it was set up in such a way that they knew that it was going to be a safe space for them to be in. So silence is something that I think about when I'm in my classrooms. And I just want to challenge all of you who are on here that we're in Pride Month. And I would just challenge you in whatever ways you think is okay to do in your classroom, is find a way to celebrate Pride in your classroom. However you all decide to do it, you know, whether it's you're reading poetry or you're doing readings or whatever it is, you know, but find the ways to celebrate it. Pride is not always about going out to the streets, right? Going up to West Hollywood. I've done all of that. I've done West Hollywood, Silver Lake, San Francisco Pride, DC Pride, New York. I've done all of that kind of stuff. I don't really have an interest in doing that anymore. But I would like for Pride to show up in the places where I get to touch people, my church community, my student community. And I just challenge you all in the whatever ways you want to, however you want to do it. You know, whether you put a rainbow flag that I have up there, put it up on your site so people could see that I'm embracing Pride in my classroom environment. So anyway, I can go on and on and on with this stuff.
Don't know if there are other questions or other things that people want to say to engage the conversation. I do want to acknowledge that we've crept past 5 o'clock.
Okay.
But we usually, you know, go past 5 o'clock for another 15, 20 minutes, however long people want to hang out and talk. But it does give us a chance to remind you that this is the last Messy for spring. Messy is going to be on a bit of a hiatus retreat for the summer to kind of retool itself and get ready to come back better than ever in the fall. But that there will be some, what are we calling them, postcards that we'll be sending out to keep you apprised of where Messy is and the work that everyone is doing. So there's that.
And don't forget the survey.
Oh, and the survey. Thank you, Elaine. But other folks who would like to join this conversation with questions, comments, stories you have to tell?
I would like to ask Russ, and probably you have addressed the intersection of race more in your dissertation, but since we have this particular platform, where do we stand now as the impact or the intersection of race and being a gay or queer person?
Wow, there are, oh boy.
And maybe
Number-
even a little bit about the Black community and this, because that seems to be a topic that is looked at.
So my experience today with the Black community is very different from 30 years ago. Is that you have people who have, you know, because of what's happened in the media, and there's so much media available to us. There's so much social media that you can, it's easy to look up things, right? So you have people who are more embracing, more understanding, accepting, because people, you know, after a while you come to terms with, I know that there's a gay man down the street. I know that there's a lesbian right there. I know there are transgender people in my family. I know that my next door neighbor, you know, you have come to terms with some things, right? So there's more of an embracing. And so when you hear, like I was just sharing about this young man this morning, I was just tearing, and he was talking about his parents, and his mother said, I was waiting for you to say to me. And the father said, and this is a true story. And the father said, and I love you just as you are. Now make sure you tell your brother, right? So I think that we are evolving, Dr. Gills. Churches are evolving. Churches are evolving for various reasons, not just because they want to always embrace the gay community. They still say, well, there's some sins, and they still kind of creep that language in there, but they're more embracing of recognizing God's children, right? The other thing that churches, and this, I know this one firsthand, other thing that churches have had to deal with in their teaching is that when you're demonizing a gay man or a lesbian, their mother is sitting in your audience, is sitting in your congregation, right? And I've had that experience where I would go by and visit the mother whose son is dying of AIDS, and the mother would say to me, well, my pastor never came by. They wouldn't come by to see me, right? So I think for various reasons, we are moving to a different place in how we are seeing it. There are more progressive churches, more progressive language, more progressive mainstream that are saying, let me rethink how I'm using language, right? Let me rethink about what it means to be the body of Christ and inviting people in as opposed to pushing people out, right? So there's that change. Now, that was not always there back in the 80s and 90s. Everybody, most of us know that part, right? But today it's shifting. There's more pressure on people to understand, to open your heart. What I would say to my family, what I would say to people is, how do you say that? Because we come from AME Zion and AME, United Methodist, that sort of stuff. And I would say to my family, how do you say that you love somebody and you look at your gay child or your lesbian child and you want to throw them out the house? Show me in the scripture where Jesus said that, right? So through these latter years, people have come to a better place of accepting and understanding and wanting to embrace their child, because absent that, and we've seen this as well, you find, I'll use LA as the examples because you'll know the language there. Absent that, you find your child up on Hollywood Boulevard selling themselves, or you'd have your child out on the street someplace selling themselves. So do you want your child out in the street, or do you want them safely at home with you? And I'm thinking about the younger adults now. So there has been some shifting. There's more literature that's coming out now. There's some more research that's coming. People who want to research by picking up their phone and looking at, whether you look at TikTok, Instagram, AI, whatever it is, there's just more ways of getting information, to recognize, what, this is God's child, and I don't need to bring any more hurt and harm, and my child is gay, and let them say that in my house so I can embrace them in my home, right? So I think the air is changing, so to speak, in the world around us.
The world. And so what about outside of the Black community? Because I know there has been some movement, like you're saying, more progressive denominations and support groups. How, outside of the Black community, how are others looking at race and race and the gay community? Because we see the number of, in transgender community, the number of police activity and murders against Black trans people. I mean, where are we there? Are we making progress there? Because race still matters.
Race does matter. There's a lot to be said about what's happening in the transgender community. There are places where they're still not accepted, and the biggest one, we've just seen it right now with over 1,000, however many people were dismissed from the military, right? And how many politicians have embraced that, right? They've embraced. They were looking for it, so they got away. They got their guy in the office, and they made it happen, right? I think the difference between where we are now and then, yes, transgenders are being demonized in those centers, but transgenders now have a community to come back to that's embracing them, right? So you have faith communities, who are embracing transgender. So even if you are in a remote location, you could still find your way. People research and they go online, and you find different groups. You find Unity, you find a Bishop Flunder, you find different organizations who are embracing the transgender community. So you build a community, right? In the white community, from what I've seen, there is more of an embracing of the transgender community. There is a place up on it's in West Hollywood. It is just south of Santa Monica Boulevard, and it is a transgender center up there. And I want to say it's the Connie Norman Center, that's up in West Hollywood. It is managed. It is run by the transgender community. And in that center, because I've done events up in there, but in that center, it's a multicultural center for the trans community. So you'll see a Black, Latinx, Asian, and so on. That's in that center, and that is in the middle of West Hollywood. And I'm not talking about on Santa Monica Boulevard. I'm talking about on one of the side enclaves there. So you have communities who are coming together around the transgender. Now, the establishment may not be, right? Again, I already said that. You see what's happening there. But you have communities, thank you for putting that in there. You have communities who are coming together around the transgender community. Then another one in LA, I want to say Children's Hospital, they have a transgender program there. Then one of our sisters, Bambi Salcido, she's in, I'm not quite sure what area she's in Hollywood or East Hollywood. She has an organization. Again, all of these that are embracing the transgender community. Our organization has a program for transgender community. So there are organizations and communities better than we did before that embrace the transgender community. What you do with this political establishment, we got to vote them out to make a change in there, to make a change on that level.
Thank you, Russell.
I guess I'm really curious, Dr. Russell, about your kids weighing in on your dissertation, and what was their feedback to you? What did they think of what you wrote?
So they haven't read the whole thing. I'd be surprised if one of them told me they read the whole thing. It's like 150 pages. So I don't think they did that. But what I made it a point to do to what you were saying, and Dr. Leslie Jackson, who is my chair, talked to us about this throughout our entire program, is tell your family what you're doing, right? This is in general what she's saying, right? Tell your family what you're doing. And so what I did was that, I made the links available, and to my siblings as well, right? So I made the links and the information available, but I told them what I was doing. I said, this is what it is. I said, I'm not hiding this. So I want you to know, when you look up my dissertation, it is going to say a scholarly personal narrative of a Black gay father. I want you to know that, right? And so my siblings, they just surrounded me and they embraced me, with this. My mother, who just passed here in January 23, her whole thing was, She just wanted to know she had a doctor in the family. That was her thing. She said, "That's when," because again, coming from she was born in the 1920s, right? So this is not something that they saw. So when your kids are growing up, you want them to get better than what you had, right? So she said, "Oh my God, we got a doctor in the family." That was her thing. My siblings, I let them know. My children, they are aware. My children know that I'm gay because they've been to my church. They've been to my organizations, right? When I retired from my ministry, they came for that. So they've been a part of this journey all along. So they are aware of my dissertation. I don't think they've read it though. I'm almost sure that they have not read it. But what I do know is that my children, I have 4 of them. I have 3 daughters and a son. They love their grandmother and they love their mother and they love their father. That's the one thing I do know, right? Their mother and father, me and my former wife, we're not together, but we're very good friends. We call ourselves co-grandparenting now. That's the language that we use. And we know that they love us. We know that they love me. I know that they will be there for me. My daughter was just here yesterday with my grandsons. They were here yesterday. My grandsons know they have a gay grandfather. They're trying to process, they're 10 years old. They're processing whatever that means for them, right? Grandpa makes me ice cream sundaes and grandpa takes me out to places and do things. That's where they are, right? I get a birthday card from my grandpa and I'm reading, when I give them cards, I make them read the card to me because I don't want them just to open it up and take the money out. I want them to read the card. So my kids know, to what you're asking, my kids know. My grandchildren kind of know, at 10 years old, how much you're going to receive. And I just know that my children, they love me. Maybe someday they will sit down and read all 144 pages, but I'm not expecting that. I just wanted to share with them, this is what I'm writing about, and I'm not hiding it. This is what I'm writing about, and they do whatever they need to do to process that.
I think what you reminded me too when you were talking about the parenting piece before, that bracketing that's so much a part of the research of literally naming our identity and our positionality and including those parts of us that are going to be spoken to during the writing and as we publish our dissertations. I feel as a grandparent myself, I feel like that approach with young people is a good one to take because there's so much that's different, as you named, in our generations about how things were framed and how things are held and how people respond to the ways in which we are trying to show up for ourselves and others. And I just would love to hear something around the grief as well. Um, I know that often in times where people have to reintroduce themselves to others, that can be really hard because of their responsiveness or lack thereof. But I just wondered in your research and also in your own experience, if there's anything that you'd like to say about that grief. I would love to hear that.
Yeah, I didn't write a lot about the grief, but I can share from my own experiences that you're leaving a life. You're leaving something that you were and did before and coming into something new. And while there is grieving through that, you're really going through an emotional place. I can't stress enough about how this is a process that you're going through. You're also recognizing that there's something good on the other side, right? And for me, the thing that helped me was when I walked into the doors January 15th, 1990, of Unity Fellowship of Christ Church on Jefferson Boulevard. I recognized clearly that I was spiritually at home. I recognized that from the first moment I walked in them doors, right? And that spiritual journey, not the biblical journey, but that spiritual journey of knowing this greater, higher power guided me through all the things that I could do, knowing that nothing could ever separate me from that love of that higher power. So while my former wife and I, we went out to a park in LA, and I told her, she said, Russ, I knew, and we cried and cried and cried because we really cared about each other, and we still do. We really cared about each other. But she also knew that Russ was on a new journey. He's on a different journey. So we had to formally now go through, because we had been divorced already in the 80s, right? We already went through that. But now we're going through this physical thing where we're actually standing in front of each other, going through another form of this separation. This is never going to happen again like it did in the 80s, right? That was a hard one. And we had many tears around that, both together and separately. But I had to recognize that God has me on a new authentic journey, right? And not to live in something that was not real, but live in being your authentic self. And on that journey, I learned that when you are your authentic self in that way, people are going to hold you and embrace you. When I was ordained into ministry, my mother-in-law came, my brother, my father, my mother, my aunts, all these families, and the in-laws, they showed up. Everybody showed up because they knew that it was in my journey, that it was a higher calling. And then I knew that I could be there for others who are on the same journey, which is why it's important for me to stand in that pride today, because I'm real clear that there are people today who are going through the struggle, who are going through the challenge. Can I be authentic? Can I be myself? Can I share my authentic stories? And I think it was like 3 weeks ago or so, I was in 4 weeks ago, I was in one of my classes, and one of my students stood up, and it was almost like they did an exhale in the class when they said, I want to tell my non-binary story. And they went on and on and on and on and on. And I knew when I was hearing that, I said, that's a moment for that person to find that in this classroom in Antioch University, that I can open up and share this part of me in a non-judgmental space, and the class embraced her. You know, it's just like a brother I had in my class last year, and he was able to share his story from his heterosexual perspective as a vet, and how that experience brought some hurt and harm, and how he walked through that. But he found himself in a space where he could share that story, and the whole class just embraced him, because it was an environment where people felt comfortable with being able to come out in whatever ways they needed to come out, whatever that looks like for people. You know, I don't judge any of that. It's whatever's going to bring you that real academic freedom so you can write about it, you know. And I'm reading a story right now, and she's got me flipped, but I'm embracing her story. You know, it's not something I heard before, right? But I'm embracing her story, because she's realizing what I'm getting out of this, that I'm in a space where I could share this story about what's happening with myself. So.
Thanks, Russ.
Holly? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna name, I'm all teary and I'm vulnerable. You're pulling on my heartstrings, so thank you for that. And yeah, I was born in 84, and like all the stories are just like, I'm just like, we're all tied together. But so thank you for that. And then also, like, I want to highlight when I heard Dr. Mack speak about Appalachia and the intersections of location and then generation.
Yeah.
So I think too, like, having have lived in the South, and now I live in Washington, you know, I feel like that's just like a whole nother layer, because generationally, what happens in the South and what happens like on the West Coast, it just like it throws a whole nother complex. So like the intergeneration and then location, I just really appreciated hearing how you wove that into all these other intersections. So I just wanted to highlight and say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's location piece. That's real important. We have churches in the South. So let me just say this. I recognize today in 2025 that I'm a privileged individual in a number of ways, right? I am in a social justice institution that I deeply love and care about, and I know that embraces all of who I am. And I get to leave that institution and go to my church community, my social community, my family community, and know that I'm totally embraced, right? It's my life is in alignment. I'm not in places where it is disjointed. However, we have churches in the South, in Atlanta and in North Carolina and South Carolina. There's a very different experience down there, right? And it's a discomforting feeling that I hear from people in those communities and how they are treated. You talk about being in the Bible Belt and how these social justice institutions are trying to work within this established, Bible Belt, Bible thumping thinking, right? So when I talk about progressive, I just say that works in LA and many parts of New York, but there are parts of the country where there's still challenges, with it. So from my seat, I'm still able to share my authentic journey because I think that's important. I think that it's important for other Black men to hear from a Black man. I'm a believer in that, right? So unapologetically, when I'm sitting with Black men, I share my story, I share my journey, because my sense is that it's going to be a breakthrough for somebody. So when I'm talking to people in the South, I just find ways to encourage and to support them to know that it is possible, right, to be your authentic self. But I'm not blind enough to think that being in the South is easy. It's easy to do that. They still have their challenges, but they know something better and different than what they knew before. And they recognize that there are Black men who identify as fathers, who identify boldly as gay and queer. I'm going to use that queer language here. They identify. They are theologians. So that gives young people somebody to reach out to connect with. And over the past, I want to say 15 or 20 years, more progressive institutions have shown up, right? So that gives people other options and places to go, right? So you don't have to go to mother's church or grandma's church if it was the church that was bringing you hurt and pain. There are other places that you can go that are going to embrace and love all of who you are. So that's why I encourage people to share your story. I was in my church convention last year, and I think I had about 60 people in the room, and I was teaching on this very point from Dr. Robert Nash that talked about scholarly liberation of scholarly writing and the power of the personal narrative. And I was really talking to people in that space about the importance of sharing your story. I'm just huge on that happening. As people telling their own story, right? And don't let someone else tell the story for you. I learned that language years ago. Don't let somebody else tell your story. You tell the story.
I am aware of the time and
Yes.
the generosity that we're impinging upon. As always, Russ, I'm always grateful to be in conversation with you. And in large measure because the conversations seem real to me, and you bring your heart. So appreciate you showing up in the way that you did today, and being with Messi. Not your first time here, but I think it makes a big difference. I don't know if there are any other announcements real quickly before we go. Otherwise, check your mailboxes. You're going to get some postcards from Messy Conversations over the summer, and we'll come back with a bang in the fall. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Russ.
Okay, have a good evening, everyone.
You too.